maps around. Now, the next part of the notes, we are going to skip a lot. So we're going to skip all the way over to page 459. And you're going to see number 17. Now we're going to come back to 17 because this is going to be a really important shortcut, kind of last major idea of today. But what I'm actually going to do is bring your attention all the way down to number 21, which for you guys is on page 460. So again, sorry, apologize, jumping around, but talking about some using our calculator, we can perform some of these operations in our calculators. So to do this, in order to get to the complex menu in your calculator, you are going to hit the math button, scroll over to complex, and then notice options 4 and 5 are going to help you find the absolute value for part 5 of a complex, as well as the argument, aka the angle. So again, you may want to write that down one more time. It is the math button, followed by you scrolling over to the CPX option, the complex option, and then either choosing number 4, the angle, or option 5, the absolute value. Okay, so again, this is going to give you your argument. This is going to, again, give you your absolute value. Okay. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it is going to help us quickly, all right, so you don't have to do all this work by yourself, go through some of these examples. So I'm going to scroll back up, and you're going to flip back to page 459. And we're going to actually start with number 20, because these are going to be some examples that are going to help us find some of the answers we're looking for. Now, we're not going to focus necessarily right now on the picture. Right? I don't want you guys to get caught up in graphing at the moment. We just are looking for some patterns. So for instance, with A, all right, let's start here. Let's look at the absolute value. So we're going to, again, just one more time to show you math button, scroll over to complex, and we're going to select option 5, which is the absolute value. And what we're going to look for here is the absolute value of each of these individual values here in number 20 of I and 2 plus 2I. So if we hit second decimal point is going to give you your I. If you hit enter, you'll see that the absolute value of that is 1. Now I'm just going to hit second enter to bring this up a little bit faster. But if we take 2 plus 2I this time, so it's going to bring it up a little faster here, and hit enter, we're going to see that the absolute value of 2 plus 2I is 2 square root 2, aka 2.8. And then last but not least, I'm going to do second enter one more time and edit this so that we get what the value of I times 2 plus 2I is. Okay, now notice, on the side note this, go back to our normal notes here, if we were to multiply these, so if we distributed the I through, we would have 2I plus 2I squared, which we talked a lot about how I squared is really negative 1, so this is actually 2I minus 2, or if we write this in A plus BI form, negative 2 plus 2I. So that's the last thing I want to find the absolute value of, is that negative 2 plus 2I, and you'll see it's 2.8 again. Okay, so keep that in mind. When we're talking about absolute values there, we had 1, 2.8, 2, and then 2.8. Now, the arguments, on the other hand, of these three values, so if we go back under the math menu and scroll over, and we're going to select the angle, we're going to look for the absolute value of these three. So I was 90 degrees. And then again, I'm just going to pull this up quickly by hitting second enter to recall. 2 plus 2I. We have 45. And then last but not least, if we take -2, I'm just going to insert a negative here, plus 2I, that product, notice here the relationship. We had 90, 45, and 135. So I'm going to write all that down. So we had absolute value of I was 1, absolute value of 2 plus, 2I is 2.8, absolute value negative 2 plus 2I, 2.8. While on the other hand, our arguments of I was 90, argument of 2 plus 2I was 45, argument of negative 2 plus 2I, 135. Okay. Now, I want you to take a moment on your own and try this exact same process for part B. And you're going to, first off, look at the product here. So if we distribute the negative I through, we end up with negative 2I minus 2I squared, but I squared is negative 1, so really this became negative 2I plus 2, and again you want to make sure you write this in the correct order so that you see it as A plus BI, so 2 minus 2I. Okay, so take a moment now, find the absolute value of negative I, 2 plus 2I, and 2 minus 2I, and then also find the arguments of negative I, 2 plus 2I, and 2 minus 2I. Now, what you might or might not notice here, right? Hopefully, if you're checking your answers, what you're going to see again is some values here of about 1, 2.8, and 2.8 for absolute values. And then you should have gotten for the arguments 270, 45, and 315. Now, by now, you may or may not be noticing the patterns that are kind of arising from these different patterns for part A and part B. But that's where I want to bring our attention way back up to the top here if we try this out with one final example. Okay, and that would be that we want to look at now the absolute value of each of these as well. So if we find the absolute value of Z and the absolute value of W, again, we can use our calculator to help shortcut this for right now. We're going to do option 5 here. So Z is 2 square root 3, and then plus 2I, so you have 4. And then for W, if we look at the absolute value of W, we have 1 plus the square root of 3. Should bring the I out behind that. Notice 2. And if we look for the value of the product, okay, notice again we can kind of short this 2 square root 3 plus 2I times 1 plus square root 3. Make sure that I is back here. We get 8I, and if we look for the value, absolute value of 8I, we get 8. So notice the relationship between 2, 4, and 8. Well, 2 times 4 is 8. So if we look here, and something very important to notice down here, the relationship between these is that z times w is going to be the absolute value of z times the absolute value of w. On the other hand, with the arguments of each of these, so if we clear this out and we start looking at the arguments, so the angle here in our menu, the argument of z, so 2 square root 3 plus 2i is 30. The angle measure for w is 1 plus square root 3 I, get 60. And then again, if we look for the angle measure of 8i, we said z times w, we have 90. So not multiplying them together here, but we are adding them together. So again, these were 30, 60, and 90. So again, the argument of the product ends up being the two arguments added together. And those shortcuts are going to be extremely important to us moving forward in future lessons. So definitely something I would advise starring in your notes here are these two as well. Okay. And again, those shortcuts then can help us find more of these examples quickly if we know what those individual arguments are. Then all you'll have to do is multiply the absolute values, to get the absolute value, and then you can just add your two arguments together of your individual ones to get your final answer there. Okay. And so that's the basics that I have for you. And the practice then are going to be on page 462. You're going to do numbers 30 to 33 and then 38. And then after the practice and checking it, you're going to work on your quick check. Okay. Thanks, guys.